All right, this the third video of the fourth reading element here for this week is you see in that PDF um, something that starts with sampling, right? And the idea of why do we do samples, right? Because and the idea, so sampling is a very important element in collecting data, and then a significant it's going to have a significant impact on the process of coding and analyzing the data. Right? So this collection of data through sampling is something that we find both in qualitative as well as in quantitative research. So you can see that in the bottom. In quantitative research is you want to be careful with particular samplings. Oftentimes you're trying to get greater numbers. Oftentimes you try to do some things that are randomized so that you're not very specific about how you're doing, but you have a random sample, right? So you look for any kind of as much variability as much as it is naturally occurring. So you just want to try to have a distribution that is a representational sample of something, of a population. That's what when we're doing political polling, that's what people do, right? And they randomize those. Sometimes through algorithms, sometimes through lists that get generated through the kind of a randomizer, right? Because when we're talking about big numbers, that's a key concern, and it's very significant. It's very important that we have that. In qualitative research, we are trying to be more specific about how do we sample. We're still sampling processes, but we try to pay attention to to the contexts that we have and to why we're looking at a particular population. So, for instance, you see in that first page, one of the key things that we do when we're trying to do this is we have a purposeful sample. Right, so I have a sample they had with very specific individuals in a very specific place that's going to try to help me understand a phenomenon. Right, so if I want to understand the idea of teaching music appreciation, I go to very specific programs, for instance, and I know that purposefully selecting those because I know something, either because they're horrible or because they're very good or because they are in different institutions or because a lot of students are interested in whatever it is, the purpose, right? When I go with it with a specific aim. If you go to the next page, you see some examples of this, of when and how sampling occurs. And you can take a look at that chart there, which is interesting and leads into all these kinds of elements, right? The critical sampling, extreme sampling, snowballing, all things that you see throughout those pages. The next one that they talked about is kind of maximum variation. So, I'm looking at motivation in my studio, and I have 50 students, but I cannot examine all 50 students. I don't have time to look at all those 50 students. But I understand and I know my students very well. So I'm going to go and I'm going to try to find a maximum variation sample, which means that I'm going to try to find 10 students or 8 students that are really representative of who I have on my student on my studio, but really provides very distinct students. The student that is really always committed, always participative, the student that rarely participates or rarely does his or her more homework, a student that seems to be very orally oriented, a student that is very visually oriented, a student that has parents from higher socioeconomic status, a student that comes from a very low income family, a student the different genders, or all kind, right? So I'm trying to, out of a very limited number of individuals, because I cannot look at all my studio, I'm going to try to find a maximum variation. And that will help me say that if I'm seeing those things in those groups, it's likely that I will see that in any other group, right? So that's the code here. We have several different others when you flip to the third page, and all of them have their own interest things, right? Sometimes I'm interested in seeing, uh, something that is very common. So I go to the typical sampling. I understand a particular population, and I'm going to say, what is the most typical group, right? So let's say I'm interested in thinking about um, the notion of a multicultural group. So I'm trying to find what is the most typical representation of Cuban interaction, music interaction in Miami. So I go for that, and that's my sampling. Right? I want an extreme sampling. I want somebody that's looking at ADHD students, and so I really sample all extreme cases of students with hyperactivity disorder. Or I have a theory about this issue of guitar and how the guitar is going to be taught in books. So I do that, right? So I have a critical sampling. For instance, I'm looking at the Cuban system. So I go to the conservatory, right? That's a critical sample, right? So you see then, and the last one is the idea of snowballing, which is really interesting too, which is I start with a particular group of 1, 2, 3 people, particularly when I don't know much about the context, right? Or I have a limited access. So I do that sampling, I talk to these people, I get some ideas, and I ask them, who else should I be interviewing? Right? So as you can see, that starts snowballing. Every time I ask them, there's more people, and then there's more people, and so forth and so on. My sampling is a really significant, important part of thinking and collecting that set of information. And we, again, will be thinking that in the future as you're doing either your thesis or your capstone. Okay, see you later.